Hello and welcome to another Flywheel Films video. Today I am with Jared in his ND Miata again, if you can't tell by the interior, and we are going to be upgrading the brakes. Really quick, just a brief overview of the things you need if you're following along and you want to do this to your own Miata. So here in front of us, we have kind of a little display of what's going on. So we're doing the rear rotors and the rear pads. The kit comes with your brackets. So these adapt the Willwood caliper to your stock location. And then of course the Willwood pads, these are just for the fronts. And then because we are swapping out the brake lines, we're gonna have to do a entire brake bleed. So we got some liquid moly SL6.4 fluid here. And then that's pretty much it. As far as tools go, there are definitely some stuff you need, but yeah, the biggest one being a torque wrench. I noticed in the instructions, they want you to torque lots of things down.
Yep.
And when it comes to your brakes, you definitely don't want to mess around with anything coming loose. So you also will need some Loctite, and then they just did like a basic tool set. Should be able to do most of it.
Yeah, it's a Miata.
Yeah, so nothing super crazy. I will say we went out and bought some flare wrenches because we're specifically going to be doing brake line stuff. So those are really nice to have. You can sometimes get by with a normal wrench, but you really don't want to strip anything on the brake lines, and those flare wrenches are really great for that. And then we will mention any other specific tools we use along the way. And then obviously you'll need a jack and jack stands. So we got the stock caliper off, and then we removed the rotor. You can reuse the rotors, and we're actually just checking out Jared's, and he probably would have been able to reuse them, but they're cheap enough to where if you just get the ones from Rock Auto like Jared did, it's probably worth replacing while you're in there. And then in the instructions, it says to actually put the rotor on prior to putting on the bracket, but we're gonna not do that just because I think it'd be a little bit easier to access everything you need to. So just make sure you grab the correct side bracket. So the little R indicates the right side of the car, which is what we're on now. And then the Flyin Miata logo just needs to face the inside of the car. So I don't have Loctite, so I'm not going to be I don't have Loctite with me right now, but this is just to show you. So letters in, and then you'll just thread these on there. Flyin does provide hardware for everything, so these larger bolts are going to be what replaces the stock caliper bracket bolts, and then a little bit of Loctite, and then I think these are torqued to, I want to say 50 foot-pound.
Yeah.
So we'll go get some Loctite, re-put these on, torque everything down, and then we'll go put the rotor on. And then really quick pro tip, get a wire brush if you did have to struggle getting your old rotor off. A little bit of rust and corrosion in here. Get a wire brush, just clean off the face, get some brake clean and spray it off, and that'll just hopefully allow your next rotor to come off a little bit easier. And you still want to make sure that the surface on this is as clean as possible. And then also, if your rotor is not coated, you don't have to worry about it, but if it has a coating on it for shipping to keep it from corroding, make sure you clean it off thoroughly with brake clean and a rag, because the oils they use to preserve these in shipping are not good for brake pads, and it is not good to have a lubricant on the surface of your rotor when you're attempting to brake. So make sure you do that. But yeah, we'll set the phone down, throw on some time lapse, and we'll show you what we do. Some thread sealant here, not thread locker, thread sealant. And when you get the lines, they come already attached here with these little caps on. So I just opted to remove the caps and remove these little elbows to make life a whole lot easier. And then they said explicitly to not put any thread sealant on the first 2 threads of your little elbow here. So you just want to make sure that you're putting the thread sealant a little bit further down. But the way these threads are is they're conical, so it's not going to fully snug up. You just need to make sure that this is positioned to where this part of the L is pointed up. So we just need to make sure that each bracket, because the calipers are not sided, you can put either caliper on either side, and you just need to make sure that you're pointing up. So I'm gonna try to knock that out real quick. That seems to work pretty well, is if you get it on the threads and you're a little further down in the thread than you want to be, just take a little paper towel or shop towel and wipe it off, and then throw it once you have the thread sealant on there. Do the same thing here. This is an 11mm wrench, by the way. It's a tiny bit big. Now, put this on the passenger side, this is faced up. This on the driver's side, that is faced up.
Here we have the stock caliper versus the 4-piston caliper. They're side by side. I mean, as far as it goes, I mean, this one's clearly a little bit smaller. This is way lighter. I mean, I think Flyin Miata says that all around you're gonna save 11 pounds unsprung weight, and like this feels it. But what I want to point out here too is, if we're talking about an upgrade and we're being totally honest, this is a single piston caliper, but look at the size of that piston. That is not a small piston versus 4 pistons of significantly smaller size on this. So you say, oh, you're going to a 4-piston caliper, it's going to be great. You're looking at these here, you know, maybe it's not as massive as it seems. It's not like this is a tiny thing, but weight alone, I mean, this is...
that you put a little bit of Loctite on there, and then you have to have your rotor on to do this portion of it, and then you just want to thread those guys in. Did the same thing on this one. I discovered this little Loctite thread locker stick, and I found it's super easy to get thread locker within the threads without making a mess. I found when I use the thread locking tubes, I'm usually spilling a bunch of it. I'm not able to get just the amount I need out. So I have really come to enjoy this. It's probably a little overpriced for what it is, but it's pretty great. If you want to do everything really by the books and torque everything down like they instruct you to, I did notice that in the instructions under the tools you need, it only has Allen keys, which you need to attach your calipers to the caliper bracket they give you. But you actually do need a 6mm hex bit on a 3/8 or whatever size your torque wrench is. That way you can actually torque these to spec. Because if you have an Allen key, obviously you can tighten it, but you won't be able to torque it without having the proper socket attachment. So do yourself a favor, don't do what we did. Have one of these before you start so you don't have to run to AutoZone in the middle of the job. You're attaching your caliper, make sure you Loctite everything. And make sure that the elbow on the back is pointed up. And then you want to torque these down to 33 foot-pounds, and don't be like me and strip the inside of one a little bit. You want to make sure you're pushing in and you're all the way in. This is the section for pro tips.
those bolts in.
So you need to be able to loosen this bolt so you can remove the fitting that is attached to the old brake line. But in order to get leverage to crack the fitting on the hard lines, you have to have that bolt in, otherwise there's no way you're going to be able to break it. So I have it just kind of threaded on, and then now I have it a little bit loosened, because once you get this fully threaded off, you're going to want to move that brake line out of the way pretty quickly so you can start catching the brake fluid coming out. When it comes to figuring out which brake line goes to which side, it's actually a little bit counterintuitive. So our initial assumption was, if we look at the old brake line over here, this is your caliper side over here, and this is your vehicle side. And we were under the assumption that if we lined it up, this flange should be the same. But when we put this on, it didn't seem to line up right, because with it on the car, this was sitting on top, where we saw in a Flyin Miata video where they were talking about this brake kit, it was below, and that seems to make a lot more sense as far as routing everything without putting too much stress on the line. So we have it just started there, and yeah, this is
much better.
A lot more slack in the line there, and then we still have plenty of room there. So there we go. So hand tight on both the car side and the caliper side. I'll go ahead and get this tightened up as well.
I don't think there's torque specs on these.
No, there's no torque specs on these, but they did recommend torquing the brake lines to 10 to 15 foot-pounds. Because we're using a flare wrench, I don't have a way to do that. So I'm just gonna kind of dial in what that feels like in my hand with this, and
go from there.
Hope for the best, I guess. So we got the front passenger side pretty much buttoned up. We just have to put in the pads, and then once we get everything done, we're gonna bleed them. But if you come around on this side, you can see the elbow is faced up, and then this clip is going to be attached on the underside, and then we have this tightens, and then these 3 bolts obviously put back in. So once we figured out which brake line goes to which side, I think that's honestly one of the more difficult parts of the install, is just trial and error. But now that we have that on, it's just, like I said, a matter of putting in the pads. This is the fun part, and the really cool part with these is all you have to do is you take this little pin up, and this retaining clip comes off, and you just slot your pads in from the back. It is definitely advised to add a little bit of grease on the back. Once that is in there, you just slot it in like so. And then once those are in there, just take your little pin and you slide everything back in, and then pop this little clip back over, and you are set.
God, that's so cool.
So it is much easier to service your pads once you have these big brakes on. We're gonna do the rears really quick, and we'll give a super brief explanation as to how to do those. There's tons of videos out there for just OEM pad replacement, but we'll show you that. So to get the rear caliper off, same as the front, there's 2 bolts holding it on. From the back side, they're 14 millimeter. I was able to squeeze my impact into the top here to get this guy off, but the lower one is a little bit trickier access. Once you get the 2 bolts off the back, it's a little bit of a pain, but we were able to get them. And you just want to get your rear pads out. And then these pads have a decent life left on them. They're not doing too bad, but it's kind of one of their while we're in here things.
Yep.
The pads will have typically like a locating hardware, so just keep track of where that was. So this one was on the top on the inside pad. And then with a lot of vehicles, rear pads, they have a little, it just looks like a little plus in there. For your parking brake, you typically have to screw this in. So, and your front pads, if you're compressing them, you can usually just use a pad compression tool, but for a lot of modern cars, like my TSX wagon has the same thing. You just kind of get a little tool in there and you just spin it around to kind of wind it back in to allow room for the new pads. And then, so you just need to make sure that you wind it back in and keep an eye on the rubber boot on the outside to make sure that it's not folding in on itself or tearing. We did take the caliper bracket off because we weren't able to get the hardware off with it still on. Now we just need to remove the rotor and then throw this guy back on and then put the caliper back in. So wrapped up the rears on both sides, and just make sure you put a little bit of grease on the back of your pads. Once you get everything reattached, obviously we have the new rotors on as well. So the rear is all buttoned up and Jared is wrapping up front. So we're nearly done with the install, and then we just have to do the brake fluid bleeding, and then we should be good to go. Slight change of plans. We decided to switch and just do dot 3 instead of dot 4 like we showed previously in the video. Really quick note though, I'm not going to do a super in-depth video on how to bleed brakes. There's tons of really great ones out there. Even Flyin Miata has one. But I do want to talk about a couple specific things for these Willwood calipers. I am using a 1/4 inch wrench. Willwood has a little slip in it that specifies that you want to use the upper bleed screw, not this lower one, when you are bleeding the system. And they do actually include a hose that is small enough to fit on this, because the one that I typically use for brakes is a little too big. And so this one fits on top of these little bleed nipples here. So, so far bleeding has gone fairly normal. It is a little funky because we are having to fill these lines with fluid, obviously. But we just got the driver's side done. We're gonna go ahead and knock out the passenger side, just so we have fluid entirely in the system. And then we're gonna do the kind of recommended start in the rear and work our way front towards the master cylinder. The rears are still just an 8 mil. On the little bleed valve there, but the fronts, like I said, if you got the Willwood kit, it is a 1/4 inch. I know this is a super abrupt ending. There is a video coming with all of our thoughts and feelings about the new kit versus the old kit and whether or not it's worth it. So definitely check that out. It should be coming out within a couple days of this video airing, and I will link it here once it is live. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Here's the cool music in the logo. Why did I word it that way? What am I doing? This is all gonna be one long clip. I'm just gonna have to find where the good stuff starts, and then the rest are gonna be outtakes that I put at the end of the video.
I stand before you today, a guilty man.
I gave the jack stand a sombrero.